Um, Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I just want to quickly, before we introduce ourselves and what we're going to be talking about, I just want to draw your attention to a little bit of housekeeping. We are recording this session, so you'll receive an email with a recording as soon as possible after the session. While myself and Tara are talking, all mics and cameras are disabled. There is a Q&A function, or you can use the chat to pop any questions in. We are going to have a Q&A session at the end of this. So whether you want to pop anything into the chat, the Q&A, or wait until the end, that's absolutely fine. And we'll get through as many questions as we can at the end. So my name is Karra McFarlane, and I'm the publisher of ELS at Oxford University Press. And I'm joined by Tara Dodson, and we are going to take you through supporting SEND with ELS. So Tara, who is one of the authors of ELS, is going to start this session and actually lead most of this session. And I'm just going to chip in on a few bits relating to the resources we publish, etc. So I will let Tara kick off.
Hi, thank you so much everybody for joining. It's lovely to see you all this afternoon. So we're going to talk about using ELS for your pupils who may have SEND or who are finding it harder to learn how to read. And so I feel like this quote that I've got on the screen now is probably apt for some of those children, that this path of a reader is not a runway, but more of a hack through a forest with individual twists and turns, entanglements and moments of surprise. And some of those surprises will be for them and some of them will be for us, whilst we try to figure out how on earth we're going to help them. So let's go. Thank you, Cara. So the ELS principles, it was created for every single child. You know, we trialed it extensively before it came to market. For those of you who have been on a training course with me before, you will know that my child has special educational needs. My eldest is autistic, and he was a guinea pig for an awful lot of what we were trying to work out before we were testing it within schools. And he reads at an age-appropriate level, and despite the difficulties he may have with inferring characters' feelings, does very well. But so we really wrote this program because Katie and I genuinely believe that every single child deserves the opportunity to learn how to read, because if we are excluding children or othering them in our curriculum, then we are adding to what is already going on for those pupils where they feel different to everyone else. So it's about including them at every single step of the process. And that's why with everything we have given you in terms of the content of the curriculum for ELS, it is pitched for every child, but then you can add scaffolding, and that's what some of the stuff we're going to cover today. So for some children, if you are in a specialist setting, a whole class model may not be the correct model for your children. I'm hoping that somewhere in this is Faye and Grace maybe, who are going to join us at the end, who are in an ASD resource space attached to their mainstream school. And they will say that they actually had sort of adapted it in many more different ways, and actually they've then really narrowed the way that they've delivered it. And so they have been able to move back to more of a whole class approach for the children in their class. But before they did that, they kind of worked out exactly what every child needed so they could work out how to fit it all together again. But so if you're in a specialist setting, whole class is not something that is non-negotiable. You can edit and amend that to fit the needs of your pupils. We want there to be high quality first teaching and these well-structured daily lesson plans. The reason why the lesson plans are so simple and familiar is because we are wanting to reduce cognitive load for the children. We are trying to make what is an incredibly complex skill as easy as possible for the children to actually learn. And that's why we have this really consistent terminology. We want our teachers to use it, our children to use it, and we're going to explain it to our parents and carers through support mornings or on our website. But so the vocabulary that we use is very simple, but it is consistent. We have consistent resources that are going to support you to teach the programme effectively. And in our training, we talk about how to use those resources to support you in the classroom. There is a lot of repetition and reinforcement, recognition of learning, because what we want to do is give the children the feeling of success. Here are things that we already know how to do well. We're going to practice doing those things that we are already masters at before we move on to learning something new. We want that success, because that success breeds success in this instance. If you feel like you're finding it really hard and you're constantly failing at everything, you are going to be turned off to the idea of learning how to read. Whereas if you are feeling successful and you know how to be successful every single day, it's going to feel like a more successful process. We want this to feel this reinforcement, not only of what they're learning, but also that feeling of you are able to do this and we're going to go through this together. We have regular and manageable assessments, and that's going to enable us to ensure that all children are able to keep up rather than catching up. And I know at the end, Debbie's going to talk about how assessment supported them in their school. And then you've got the training, the E-model of training. So on our site, there is Embed, Enact and Enable on the ELS site, and that supports you with what you need to do as a kind of core program for training. But there are also other videos there that exemplify different elements of the teaching as well. So there's examples of lessons, there's one in a classroom, there's models of how to do the reading. So there's lots of different training on our site as well if you explore it further. And that's going to help you to make sure that everybody feels confident with what they need to do. Thank you, Cara. So the structure is the most important thing when thinking about how it's supporting our pupils that are finding it harder to learn how to read. These really clear and simple daily classroom routines are key. There's a lot of research. I haven't included lots of that in the slides today, but there's so much research out there about the routines in the classroom and about cognitive load. And those consistent lesson structures are key as well, because we want children to know what to expect every single time they come to the classroom, so that you are not throwing them in the deep end with having to learn something new. So consistent lesson structures, if you can dial your minds back to your first few years of teaching and when you were learning the curriculum for the year group that you were teaching, or if you were lucky like me and you got moved every year for the first few years, I was constantly at cognitive overload, trying to work out what it was I needed to know as a teacher, what it was I needed to teach the children, how I was going to actually make that happen. And it's this constant overload cognitively that we as adults, it's challenging. You know, when you're an ECT, it's a really difficult job. But what we don't want to do is put our children in that position every day voluntarily. So that's why we've stripped ELS back to these really simple routines, these really consistent structures. There are clear expectations, and we'll go through this in a minute when I look at some examples of parts of the lesson, even down to the way the slides look is the same every day. Because we don't want the children to have to think about anything extraneous, anything more than, I'm here, we're going to look at stuff I already know how to do, going to teach me something new, and then you're going to show me how to apply it so I can be independent in doing so. And that repetition, it's predictable for all children, but particularly for our children who are finding it hardest to learn how to read, our children who do have special educational needs, that is so key. And those routines being consistent, that expectation, that what we might do in our, you know, if we've got a child with autism where we have our visual timetables, our now and our next, that is what we've built into the lesson here, so that every child knows what is going to happen. So they've got that consistent and predictable routine. And there is that simple and direct application which we are going to model, and it's consistent throughout the programme. And we are always modelling because we always want to show every child how to be successful, but particularly for our pupils who are finding it hardest to learn how to read because of whatever barrier might be going on for them, whatever special educational need they may have, that we are giving them that model so that they can access it, but then when they do it themselves, they can comprehend the skills that they're working on. Thank you, Cara. So here is just a little bit of the research that's out there. So we've got some comments here. Now, these are about your visual classrooms. So thinking about the high load visual environment as affecting children's cognitive performance. Children perform better in a low load visual environment where there is less stuff to distract them. Often we find classrooms, you know, that there is information on the wall, like our frieze, for example. We have to explicitly teach children how to engage with that material so that every child can use it as a resource. Otherwise, it's wallpaper. That's why in our training videos, we talk about have your frieze near your whiteboard, show them the flashcard, you've introduced the sound, you've shown them the flashcard, go and show them on the wall frieze, go and show them on the poster so that children now know how to use that tool effectively. But don't have tons and tons and tons and tons of things pasted all over the walls, because it's actually going to make it harder for children to learn. We've got another one here. In the presence of lots of visual displays, children spent more time overall engaging in off-task behaviour than in sparser conditions. Importantly, children performed significantly worse in their learning scores in a highly decorated condition of their classroom. Thank you, Cara. And then we've got the next slide that includes a quote about children with autistic spectrum disorder. So paying attention is that crucial first step towards learning. And the presence of visual displays had a significant impact on attention for all children, but to a greater extent for children with ASD. So there is an awful lot of research out there, just even thinking about what our classrooms look like, that supported us in the way that we then developed the whiteboards in our classrooms, so that we are giving children the information in the clearest way possible and the simplest way possible. Thank you. So the visual layout of ELS is going to support all children because we have really clean text space. There is that repetition of simple artwork, so they'll see the same things in the words that they may be reading, and then the captions, phrases or sentences that are coming up in the artwork on the whiteboards, but also in the apply books. They're seeing the same things. They know what that is. They already know they already know what that word means because you've talked about it in the lesson. They've seen that artwork before. You've given them that verbal explanation, so they've got that understanding to support their vocabulary knowledge. The slides for each part of the lesson look the same. This is really key, not just for the children, but also for us as the teachers, so that if I have my harder to read and spell words, for example, next to me, I know where those 4 boxes are. And once I've looked once next to me, actually what I can then spend the rest of the time doing is, as I am pointing at the words for the children to read, is that I can be engaging with them and seeing which are the children that know these words, but which are the children that need my help. And are those children right at the front of my classroom under my feet, where I can give them the word again if they need it. So thinking also about where the children are placed on the carpet then. Slides are looking the same for each part of the lesson. Only the information that the children need to engage with is included. Anything where there's the little teacher icon pop-out tool, that's for you as the teacher. The children aren't intended to engage with that. So it might be that when you're doing your oral blending, you get the children on their feet, you've turned them the opposite way from the board, you've opened that list and you can read it over the top of their heads, but they then get to not worry about anything new popping up on the screen. They're then just engaging with you on their robot arms blending hands and saying the words with you. Word cards can be printed to match the lesson. And then that removes the need for the children to look at the screen. So for every single lesson, the words that are read as part of the practice section of the lesson, those are printable. They are on the ELS, on the Oxford OWL site, and they are matched to every single lesson. So if you have a child who does not benefit from looking at the screen, equally, if you have children that you will want to focus on fewer words and read one-to-one with an adult that's maybe working with them on the carpet in your classroom, you could have those word cards printed instead. So rather than them having to read the 8 words with their peers, if you have a child that's working one-to-one with an adult, you might opt to read 3 or 4 of the words, and they could work at their own speed then, whilst the other children are reading the 8 words. You could have an adult working one-to-one with 3 of the same words their peers are reading, but reducing the need for that child to engage at the same speed as everybody else, or to decode and blend at that same speed. You can use colour overlay on Chrome, which I'll show you an example of in a second, and that allows you to add a coloured filter to your online lessons. So if you've ever asked a question about dyslexia and the background colour, this is an option for you that you can use. It's a free download, colour overlay. It's on Chrome, and you can then choose the colour that you would like to overlay onto the online lessons. And we have not only our small flashcards and wall frees, but we now also have the A4 large format wall flashcards and a larger wall freeze. So for those children who may have visual difficulties, you can then use those as well. Thank you, Cara. So here are some examples just from what I was speaking about there. So you can see on the left hand side, we've got those word cards that I referred to. So we've got not just the real words, but also the pseudo words, and they're matched to each lesson. So you can see where they fit. And then what we've done in our school, where we have printed these off for some pupils, is when you print them, they're on A4, but we've just printed them onto A3, so they're a bit larger. And that was just our choice that worked for the children that we were using them with. And then on the right hand side, you can see just how repetitive the structure is of those slides, how they are the same every day. So we've got then we've got you much further through the programme, and then we've got I spelling I in spring 1 of year 1, and it looks the same every day because we want children to know that you are going to give them that information, but also that they are expecting visually what they're going to see, and that you've then got those opportunities to explain that language to them and that vocabulary. But it's the same every single day. And then here is an example of the colour overlay that I was talking about. That's a Chrome plugin. So if you have pupils in your class that are dyslexic or who would use a coloured overlay when they're reading, or colour piece of paper if you're printing work for them, that you can then use this here and you can adjust it to whatever colour they might need. So supporting the reduction of cognitive load. This is really key, and there's a lot of research out there about cognitive load and how by simplifying the load, we allow the materials for whatever subject it is that we're teaching to be much easier to engage with for the children. So we have only included the key information on the slides. It's part of the reason why there are no sort of games in ELS, because actually those are a distraction from what you're doing. So your core thing is you've got to teach a GPC. At the end of the lesson, when you ask the child, what have you learnt today? You want them to say, I learnt, insert sound here. We don't want it to be, I played this game and it was really exciting, and tell you all about the game. But in my experience and Katie's experience of having done school support, before ELS existed, is that the children would be wax lyrical about the lovely game they played, and you said, well, what did you learn? It was much harder for them to unpick what that game was actually trying to teach them. So it is really simple, but it means that you as the teacher get to actually teach the children that you have in your classroom. So you've got that key information. Those routines are really consistent and they do involve very little change. And it's like I said earlier, we want this to be a success model. We want the children to know how to be successful so that they can be successful every day. And that success is actually bred from consistency. And you'll notice when you're teaching in your reception classrooms particularly, and they're brand new to school and they're brand new to ELS, that they pick up on that routine really quickly. They know what's going to happen next. They're able to predict what you might do. So if you forget to do something, they're often going, hang on a second, aren't you supposed to hide the flashcard? Or you didn't show us the picture. They know what you're supposed to do. So that consistency it's a small thing, but it makes it so much easier for your learners. We are linking existing knowledge to new information. I had a great question in the inbox this week, actually, about the word has. So as soon as we've taught the harder to read and spell word as, we now know, so we can now read as has. So we can teach the children to make those links with existing knowledge to new information. And what we're kind of teaching them to do with that is a sort of problem solving skill. So I know this, and if I take this other piece of information over here, I can build a new piece of knowledge that I then have. So we're constantly making links for the children to show them how to make links with the knowledge that they already have and what we've already taught them. There is ample opportunity for rehearsal, not only in the lesson itself, but then if you're delivering that in the lesson intervention to your pupils as well, you've got that opportunity to really listen for those sounds within the words and to discern which order you're hearing those sounds in. And, that's what that activity is really about. It's about listening. Can they hear the sounds? Can they reliably say the sounds? Can they identify the order of the sounds? And it's that additional rehearsal which is going to then support us when we're decoding and blending. Opportunity, there are images to support understanding. That's going to support children with their own wider schema of what's going on for them in the world, their background knowledge, their wider understanding and their vocabulary. We need to give children vocabulary knowledge so that they're able to access as much of our curriculum as possible. And for those pupils who find it harder to learn how to read in the first few years of school, they tend to learn less overall because they do not have the vocabulary knowledge to underpin the wider curriculum that you are trying to teach. So the images are there for you to give the children understanding. So for some, it could be as simple as saying, this is a duck. you know, and other times it might be there's a word acoustic, for example, with a guitar. That's obviously going to require an explanation about some guitars are electric, and that means that they're wired and they plug into the electricity, and some guitars, they don't need that. They just make the sound on their own as you're playing them. You maybe even have one in your classroom. You could talk about what the word acoustic means, and it's a subject knowledge then that they've got for their music lessons. So we've thought really carefully about what words are in the lessons to support children's understanding, but then equally the lessons that are in the lesson intervention for those pupils who are getting additional support. Those words, we've picked words that we know that the children will need to use and need to read more frequently than the other ones, because we know that they're part of our curriculum or they're common words that we use. So we've got lots of repetition as well. We always review the flashcards at the beginning of the lesson. We review the harder to read and spell words that we've already taught. We read words more fluently that we've already learned to decode. There is lots of opportunities to repeat. We repeat that practice every time we decode the word, say the sound, identify the grapheme within the word, decode and blend. We are constantly repeating the skills that we want children to acquire so that they're consolidating that understanding, but we can do it as many times as we need to, but it's that to support the children to become independent. We're going to repeat these skills as many times as they need until they're able to do them independently. We review GPCs and the harder to read and spell words. That's going to support that transition to the long-term memory, and that there is a clear focus on the teaching of GPCs and then an application of this understanding. Thank you, Cara. So outside of the kind of core structures of the programme, it supports all children. So it's delivered, there are multiple interventions for ELS. So we've got the in the lesson intervention, and then we've got the 3 one-to-one interventions. The in the lesson intervention is designed to be delivered by the teacher. It's a familiar adult, it's a familiar routine, but it's you as the class teacher knowing where that child is. That in the lesson intervention is that activity where you have the 4 words on the screen. You build those words with the grapheme tiles and you decode and blend. And you use a spelling sequence to support you. At this point, it's about hearing those sounds within words. Now, if you have children, if you've got a group of children that you're working with in the lesson intervention who are focusing on closing GPC gaps from earlier on in the programme, you could at that point, instead of working on the GPC from the day's lesson, you could work on the GPC that those children are consolidating outside of the lesson as well. So say you're teaching phase 5, but you've got a group of 5 children with a phase 3 gap. You could go and use that phase 3 lesson, that GPC lesson from phase 3, and use the in the lesson intervention from that lesson to work as an intervention there in the classroom. That does take a little bit of management as a kind of a hack to get around Oxford Owl not allowing you to open 2 different whiteboards on the same browser. Is that you do just need to have 2 browsers open with Oxford Owl in one and have the other lesson ready to go, so you can just flip between them. But we've used that really successfully. So it's just another opportunity to review those GPCs that they might be trying to work on outside of the teaching timetable. And then you've got those interventions that focus on really specific areas of need. And if you're not sure, in the handbook, there is a blurb that explains which of these is for at what point. But so for oral blending, for lots of reception children at the moment, oral blending is probably what you're going to be looking at. So it's around that sound and auditory awareness, practicing saying the sounds, listening to those sounds, repeating the model that's being given to them. So it's about actually making the correct sound for the children and practicing them blending those sounds together correctly to form the words. Before you could do too much with your GPC recognition there, you need to practice oral blending. Your GPC recognition is around reteaching the GPC. So it's some elements are similar to the lesson, some elements of that intervention are different, but it's about explicitly teaching the GPC again. The reason that these interventions are designed to be one-to-one is because for our children who are finding it hardest for whatever reason to learn how to read, they need that direct focus with an adult. They need to hear it modelled clearly. They need to be able to see your mouth up close. You need to be able to listen to exactly what they're doing or saying, so that you can then support them to close those gaps. So the GPC recognition is to teach a GPC. Blending for reading is where the child has the GPC knowledge, i.e. you can show them a flashcard, they can tell you what the sound is, but they are struggling to consistently blend that sound in words. So they might know the GPC, but they might not yet be blending that GPC within words, and that's when you would use blending for reading. You can, if you're working with older children, we'll talk about progress at the end. But if you are working with older children and you're using ELS, you can use the GPC recognition and blending for reading together as one slightly longer intervention to teach a GPC and then get them to blend it immediately, that kind of direct application, but with one-to-one support. We do have an SEN timetable and we've adapted to slow the progression. This is intended for our specialist settings, but there may be extreme circumstances under which at a school you may have a small group of pupils who may need to use the slowed progression. If you did use the slowed progression for a small number of pupils, it would mean that they would have to be taught at the same time that your children are having their normal phonics lesson, and that this small number of pupils, although they will not complete the programme by the end of year one, they would meet the requirements to most likely, I have to kind of caveat this with statistically likely that things that they haven't yet come across are unlikely to come up on the phonics screening check. So we'll definitely have covered phase 5, and it's statistically likely that therefore they would be able to pass the phonics screening check if considering the phonics screening check is 32 out of 40. So as a school, you would have to make that decision. I don't often see mainstream settings needing to use the adapted timetable for SEN. In fact, in some of the specialist settings that we work with, they don't even use the adapted timetable. They teach it at the same pace. So it's there, and Kara's going to show you what it looks like and explain it to you in a moment. And there's some videos of how to find it, but it is there if you do need it. There's an enabled guidance that supports you with ideas like segmenting the teaching into smaller sections. If you have children that are demand avoidant, if you've got children that struggle to concentrate, you could chunk up your lesson into smaller blocks and teach it across the day so that the child still gets the same information, but they're able to access it when and how they can. We do have assessments, but we also have non-verbal assessments. And this is something that I feel like lots of people need potentially, but haven't discovered yet. They're on the Oxford Owls site. They're non-verbal assessments. They're provided for each assessment point. They match exactly what happens in the normal one, except for children, they don't need to communicate. So if you have children that are anxious, you've got children who maybe are autistic and don't like to verbalise what they know. You've got children who are, pathologically demand avoidant. You've got children who are non-verbal. They can still be assessed, but they can be assessed in a slower process, and they can be assessed with one of the kids at school. He puts little animals over the top of the ones when he's picked the ones that they are. It's just a way to engage them with doing the assessments so that we still know what they know, but they can engage in a way that's meaningful and purposeful for them and doesn't cause you or them any additional stress in trying to get them to perform to the screen and use the use phonics tracker. So that is an option that's out there as well. And then under the SEN tab on Oxford Owl, we also have the editable sound mat. That was originally designed with a school who teaches who has deaf pupils alongside hearing pupils. And for them, there are little pop-up boxes you can just click and you can, replace the box with an image. For them, they were using it for gestures, so that pupils who were using, and they use visual phonics in that school, who were using visual phonics, they were replacing those purple boxes with the gestures, so that children had the sound mat with the gesture that they were using. But we've also had it in one of the schools that I was working with recently. They were saying that for one of the autistic pupils, it didn't like the cartoons. So they just went and found real images of all of that and just copied and put those in instead, so that they then had the same information as everybody else. They could use the same rhymes, but it just suited that individual learner. And you can use other, there are other things that you can put on that editable sound mat as well that's going to support your children with their learning. Thank you, Cara.
Thank you. So Tara just spoke about the slow progression. So from the very beginning of the publication of ELS, we have had the enable guidance that Tara talked about. Within that enable guidance, it tells you how you can slow the progression, and it tells you how you can chunk up the lesson, as Tara just said. That guidance is in there, but we had feedback to say that a bit more detail was needed for the slow progression, so that you could really see with those small number of children that did need to follow a slow progression exactly how that would work, what apply book pages they should be on, what books they should be reading. So that's where this document came from. As Tara said, this is really for those children who just aren't able to access the main ELS progression, and that will not be many children, but there will be some. So always follow that main ELS progression to begin with. This is just for those children who are not able to access it. And so this guidance is available on the within the SEN filter on Oxford OWL, and it takes you through every single day. And what it does on each day is it links to the presentation you'll need for that day. So the way it works is that each GPC will be taught across 2 lessons. So that means you'll need 1 presentation across 2 lessons in reception. And then when you get onto the alternative GPCs in year 1, you'll actually use 1 presentation across 4 lessons. And to make that as simple as possible, they're all linked to here. And it shows you which parts of the lesson you should cover in each session. And it shows you which activity book pages you need to turn to when, and which books you should be reading. The books that have been chosen are books that offer that application for children, but at the simplest level, without lots of additional detail that is going to stop them from potentially being able to read, and to ensure they can succeed when they are reading books. So all of that information is included here, which should make it just as easy for you to navigate through using the slow progression with a few children as it is to use the main progression with your whole class. Just to make it even easier, on the SEN filter, there are also 2 videos, one for reception and one for year 1, which take you through a lesson and which parts of it you should use for each session, and how that should be broken up when you're following the slow progression. Also, on the SEN filter, you will find all of your resources to support SEN. So these are the cards that Tara was talking about. These are the sound maps where you can add in pictures. It's very simple. You just click on a box within the PDF, and you should be able to upload the picture to there. If you have a program that is not working for, then just email us and we can send you an alternative version. But for the majority, that should work, that you can just click it and add a picture in. The enable guidance is on there. The word cards that we talked about, where you can have the word cards of the words that are read in the lesson and cut them out and work with individual children, they are all in that SEN filter. And we're adding bits to it all the time. So that's developing as the program develops. Tara, this is you. Oh, you're on mute.
There I was, being quiet whilst you were. So how to decide on the best way to support your children. First of all, look at the individual needs of your child. So let's think about reception right now. For some children, they are going to be flying. They'll have come in. Maybe they could already read a little bit and write some, and they are going to be finding those apply books easy, and they'll be off. And for other children, you might be working on what we might have originally, what we might think of as phase 1 skills, and it will be about keeping up with that phase 1 kind of content alongside the teaching of GPCs. So it says in the framework that we should not wait until we have completed our EOFS baseline assessment before we start teaching GPCs, which really means we've got to get going in the first few weeks. So you have the content there. Now, for some children, they might be able to participate in the lesson, but they might not, say, be ready to sit on a chair or to hold a pencil. And for those pupils, if you get our e-letter, I did give some support in that the other day about how to use the apply books in reception. But it's a really good point for children who are mark making, or the beginning of mark making, or not yet mark making at all. And actually what we want to do is have those children tell us the sound. So say that sound. say whatever the pronunciation may be for that child, whether it's due to an accent or speech, that it's consistent so that we know that they've understood what the sound is. Can they then point to that sound on the grapheme spotter sheet, for example? The next step would be, can the child trace the letter? Now, for some children, that might be the point at which we reach their capabilities at this point of the year. And they've said the sound and they've identified the sound. So I now know that you can say the sound and you can tell me what that sound is. You can show me which one that sound is. You could then have a go at tracing the sound. The next step is, if they need support or without support, they can have a go at writing that grapheme themselves. The least important thing is the handwriting. You can put, and you know, some schools put a highlighter. They write the letter down so that children are just tracing over the highlight, and that's fine. That's what that child needs. That's what they should get. If that child's trying to mark make, let them have a go at mark making. We don't want to remove the opportunity for them. You could ask them to trace over the grapheme in the grapheme spotter grid and trace over your writing, so that they're still having the same opportunity as everyone else, but it's meeting them at their level. Equally, if you're looking at the individual needs of the child, it might be that they need to have the lesson gone over again. It could be that they need to have 2 of the same intervention every day. It could be that they need to have those word cards, or that they need to do that in the lesson intervention, but at a table 1-to-1, whilst you maybe do the rest of the group, or that they do it later on in the day. But you are just making your judgments based on the needs of the individual child. Thinking about what provision you then have available. So, for example, if you are the only person in your classroom, you need to train the children who are going to the tables to do their apply book so that they sit and concentrate and do it. So you've made your expectation for them extremely clear. And by modelling it to them first, you make that an awful lot easier because they've already seen how to be successful. But that then allows you the time to sit with your children and deliver that in the lesson intervention. Equally, if you've got other adults, the other adults can be supporting those children at tables. How quickly are the children actually able to learn the sounds, consolidate and meaningfully apply their understanding? So if you're working in a specialist setting particularly, this might be where that slowed down progression comes in. How are you going to follow up on those sessions? Is it a whole class with follow-up sessions? Are we going to need 1-to-1 sessions? Are we going to slow the progression for specific children? What is it that we are going to then do to support that child? Thinking about what the individual needs of that child are. I say, you know, I've got lots of ideas, and, you know, we work with lots of schools, and there's always people saying, oh, this is what we've done and it's worked really well. And, you know, if you've come and ask us and say that this is the situation, this is what's going on for these kids, what should I do? I'm always so happy to say this, here are some ideas. But ELS is a curriculum programme, and whilst we have written lots of different guidance to support you with lots of different ideas, and we're adding to it, as Cara said all the time, you do have to make your professional judgment on the child that you have in front of you, and you know your children. If you know that your child in your class cannot keep up with the pace of this lesson because they have an additional need that is preventing them from engaging in the same way as their peers, you are allowed to do something about that. You are allowed to opt to use the slowed progression, to reteach the lesson, to go over the same learning again, to break it down into smaller sections. You are allowed to choose to meet the needs of, you know, you are allowed to meet the needs of the children that you have in front of you. And this might mean that you need to get support from other places. There are a few schools in our trust, and we are really good at nabbing adults that are skilled and sending them to the place where they are needed. We had the head teacher go down to a reception in one of our, we've got a tiny little school, and don't even have 30 children in a class, but the head teacher was really good with pure sounds. So we were like, right, we're going to use you. So here are 6 children, and I want you to go and visit them every morning, and you're going to review this with them every single day. So just went, and for those children that had speech and language difficulties, just went and had them one-on-one in the corridor and just went over saying some sounds with them, so that a child just had that extra opportunity to hear an adult saying the sounds. And for those children, that made a massive difference. So it's really thinking about who is available, what skills do we have in our building, who can support me to make sure that my pupils get what they need. And, you know, I do appreciate that not everybody is lucky enough to have a second adult in their classroom with them. But if you do have another adult in your classroom, make sure that you are deploying them well so that they are supporting you to meet those pupils' needs. So you have those children that need the most support at the front of the carpet where you are, and that other adult is then looking at the children. You will never see Katie or I go in to a phonics lesson and observe from the back of the class, because I don't know what's going on unless I can see the children's faces. And that's what we want our adults to do, that are supporting us in the teaching there, is to be looking at the children so that they can then see, right, this child didn't have the right shape for their mouth. That child's struggling with decoding and blending, and they can go and help that child and then return. I kind of describe it when I go to do Evolve Days, it's like it's a docking system. The dock is at the front of the classroom, and as a LSO or teaching assistant, you're going to go to see the child that has the need, and then you're going to come back so that you're then looking for the next child. And we might spot things together, and then we might do something about it. But that you are using that adult there to support you as well, because it's kind of your show. You know, you're stuck at the front often. So having those children that need you the most right under your feet, yes. Right in your line of sight, yes. But there comes a point where you can't be running around the back of the carpet every few seconds. So if you have another adult, let them do that work for you and go around. Maybe it's repeating the same sounds that you've said. Maybe it's going over the flashcards again. Maybe it's choosing fewer of those words from the practice part of the lesson so that are decoding and blending 3 instead of 8. Whatever it is that you know that child needs, make sure that if you have additional members of staff, that they are delivering that to those children that need it. Thank you, Cara. And this is something that I talk about a lot with lots of different people. I was talking to one of my friends who's who's very highly specialised speech and language therapist, and I was saying to her I'd be fascinated to do some research, and she said that's not research, that's a doctorate. But we were looking at the long-term impact of children on COVID, and we're thinking about those 12 to 36 months, which is our reception cohort now particularly. This is core time for language and core time for speech development. And they were in and out of lockdowns, which means that they were often in and out of nursery, or they weren't in nursery at all. They weren't integrated, they weren't socializing, they weren't playing with their peers. So there's a huge impact on language and vocabulary for those children. We've got this culture of the smartphone. You know, we consume so much media online, in our hands, on an iPad. Children aren't seeing the modelling of reading happening at home. You know, we even read the newspaper online. They aren't seeing that model of reading happening at home. Parents are working from home more, which is meaning particularly for those children who were at home during lockdown, there's less face-to-face interaction. I don't know if any of you guys have seen it, but certainly in some of our schools and teachers that I've spoken to, children have arrived in reception with American accents, because that's where they've been getting their dialogue, their interaction has been with screens. So they have had the model of the American accent because they've been consuming online, and TV. So there's less face-to-face interaction. So even speech isn't being modelled to the children at home necessarily. Then we've also got, the terrifying statistics that do exist. Children are in reading for pleasure less. 1 in 3 children never hear a bedtime story. That is terrifying. Doesn't mean that the other 2 in 3 hear one every day either. It just means that 1 in 3 of them will never hear one at all. And in your class, that might be 1 child, or in some classes, that will be all 30 children. That reading for pleasure is in decline. It's not surprising if we're not modelling reading for pleasure to our children. But equally, we're getting more speech and language referrals. So last academic year, they went up by 10%. I'll be interested to see what the percentage increase is at the end of the year. And we know as educators, in schools, you cannot get the help because their waiting lists are now so long. So we are now picking up lots and lots and lots of the kind of where the system is not supporting us in our settings, that we are then having to pick up a lot of these things. So it is, we have an ever increasing challenging job, but we have tried to make ELS a very simple part of that job. And as I say, there are always ideas or schools who've done something in the past, or people who the OUP team will be able to put you in touch with me or Katie, or you can come and get in touch with us directly. We're really happy to help. But hopefully some of the ideas that I've shared will be useful already in thinking about how to support those children, whether it's something like use your in-lesson intervention from the GPC that they're working on, or whether it's break up the lesson, or whether it's ask them to read fewer words in the lesson. Where there are 3 sentences, captions or phrases, maybe they only read 1. You can make your decision for the child so that they're still accessing that learning, but at a pace and at kind of a requirement that they're able to meet. Right, I think
I'm going to touch very quickly
Yes.
on ELS Progress. The reason I'm not going into this in detail is because we have done another webinar on this. And if you get in touch, we can share the recording of that with you if you haven't already seen it. Just to say, ELS Progress is a catch up for children in year 3 and above who've missed out on an effective SSP. They might have been out of school for long gaps of time. They just might not have been taught that kind of rigor of an SSP before they have got to this stage. It's not day-to-day whole class teaching. It's catch up in small groups. It's for year 3 and above. It has age appropriate books within the pack. So it's teaching that is based upon the interventions within ELS, paired with age appropriate books that have content, artwork, everything that is appropriate for children year 3 and above. And it's for those children who just haven't had that rigor and who are struggling older readers. So just a really quick breakdown of what's in the pack. You've got your books for age appropriate books. You've got your grapheme cards, so they're all still kind of matching ELS in terms of what children might have seen bits of already. And you've got the handbook within that as well. As I say, if you want more information, get in touch at OUP, or we can share the webinar with you. I think now are we going to go questions, or is Debbie going to?
Yes, I'm hoping that Faye or Grace might be lurking and they might help and join in. But Debbie is going to come and have a little chat with us about how ELS is working in her setting. And I don't know if Grace or Faye, if you're here, if you could let yourselves be known, and then we can unblock you from interaction. Ah, there you are. I can see you. Hi.
Hello.
Hello. You're both here. 2 for 1. Yay. So we're just going to have a quick chat about, we've got very different settings. We've got a mainstream setting, and then we've got Grace and Faye who are in a resource space attached to their mainstream primary. And their aim is to get their pupils back into that mainstream classroom. So you'll hear them talking about, or to be participating in that mainstream classroom. So you'll hear them talk about what they do and how it supports their pupils. But so just as a kind of first question, and we will have to be quick because I know we could talk forever, particularly Debbie and I. What made you choose ELS, Debbie?
We were a letters and science school before, so it made sense for us to carry on. And we had mostly OUP books. We had like a reading audit to realign our reading books, and it just matched completely, and it suited our school, so we took it on from early on.
And then I know for you guys, Grace and Faye, it was a bit different, wasn't it?
Yeah, so we're a resource base attached to a mainstream primary, mainstream infant school. And so the scheme was actually chosen by the mainstream school. And so because we want some of our children to integrate into mainstream lessons, we wanted to do the same scheme as the rest of the school, so that when they were ready, they could integrate and they were already familiar with the programme and the slides and how the lesson would work.
Fab. Thank you. So Debbie, you were already doing well, kind of outcomes for your kids, phonics screening check. It was already a positive picture. But for you, how have you found, or what, you know, and kind of like, how have you used ELS to support your pupils who do have special educational needs?
We were good with our results, but we still had gaps. So we had a lot of children who were passing at 32 out of 40, whereas now the changes that you know, the majority of our children now are getting 38 or above, and a lot more 40 out of 40 as well at the phonics screen check at year 1. What we found before was that we would end up doing the typical sort of grouping of children, and our children before would only be stuck on sort of phase 2 sounds for a very long time. We're having the opportunity to move on, whereas now with ELS, with the whole class teaching approach, everybody has that same opportunity. And we're finding our special needs children, especially because I teach in reception, so some of our children who aren't quite school ready yet are being exposed to that phase 2, and then after Christmas they've, you know, their PSED, everything's moved on, their attention listening, they're ready, they're picking up the phase 3 quickly later on in the year, and then we can reteach the phase 2 science. So we've seen that really successful, so they haven't missed and they haven't got huge gaps. They're still being exposed to that whole class teaching, but then it makes it so much easier for them to catch up and keep up with their peers ready for year 1. That's what we found, you know, has made the most, you know, close the gaps quickest, really, to having that whole class teaching, and also just using the assessments really carefully, making sure that we're picking up those children very quickly and making sure that they're getting either an intervention or they're having the reteaching. And we were really proud to say that all our SEN children last year passed the phonics screen. So that's been a real sort of shift for us, that you know, we haven't just got the children who were always succeeding well. Now we've got everybody achieving well, which has been great.
Fantastic. I'm not going to ask about the phonics screening check, Grace, but how are you finding the outcomes for your pupils as you're using ELS with them?
Yeah, so last year we did teach as a whole class, and we found that some children really flew and they really progressed really well. And then we've had new children that have joined our room in September, and so they've started at the beginning of ELS, and so some of those children from last year obviously need to progress onto the next phase and the next stage. And so this year we've started teaching more in groups. So we've got a phase 2 group, a phase 3/5 group. They're just about to move into phase 5. And then we had a couple of children who completed the phonics screening last year, and so they're going to move on to the ELS spelling. And so the progression for us has been really good, even just in terms of their listening and attention. They're able now to sit for more of the ELS lesson itself. And last year we focused on 1 GPC for the whole week. We found that was enough for our children, and so we stretched the whole ELS lesson across over a week, so they had really good coverage across the week. And then this year they're able to now tolerate 2 sounds, two GPCs in a week, so we're able to move through the program a bit quicker. But they needed that time last year to really get used to the program, get used to the slides, get used to the structure and the routine. And so this year they're now ready, it's more familiar, they're able to access it a lot more.
Fabulous. How have you found the opportunities with repetition and the routines of the lesson have supported your pupils?
Yeah, so all of our children absolutely thrive on the structure and the routine. So what we found really beneficial was very early on, we needed to add a visual timetable and a visual structure, which I have got here. Don't know if you can see that.
So there's
on our board
flashcards, robot arms. So each one of these will get taken off the schedule as we complete them and move on to the next one. Drum roll, new sound. Yeah.
So we found that, you know, pretty much every single child with SEN is used to a visual timetable, that really visual structure and that really clear visual routine. And so that's what we used at the beginning of our phonics lessons. You know, they know that structure, they know that routine. And so every time a part of that session is complete, it gets taken off. And so the children know exactly what comes next, how long they've got to sit for, when the session is over, what comes next. And they're so used to that routine every day, every phonics session, they're used to seeing those things in order, that it's helped their engagement immensely. Like, they don't get up halfway through the session and walk off. They know exactly how long they've got to sit for, what comes next. And so, yeah, that visual structure is
the confidence, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really helps, you know, reduce the anxiety, reduce the cognitive load. They don't have to think about what comes next. They don't have to try and remember what they've got to do. It's there in a really visual form.
Fantastic, thank you. What about you guys, Debbie? How do you find that routine and structure supports your children?
We find that, especially for the children, our lowest 20% children and the SEN children, especially going from reception into year 1, they know the routines, they don't have to think about anything else, they just have to learn that new teaching. We found it as well, we've gone into ELS year 2 as well now, and our year 2 teacher said that, you know, she can really see the change, that those children know those routines, so they don't have to think about that, they can just take on that new learning, and it means that they can join in and be supported, and everybody can help, you know, the TAs know what coming next as well, so they can get ready and preempt, you know, and pre-teach maybe to some of the children who need that as well within the lesson as well. So that works with, you know, yeah.
Fantastic, thank you. And then finally about supplementing resources, because Grace and Faye, I know you've got a few extra bits that you'd added in. What can you talk a little bit about what you have added in and kind of how you found that to be helpful?
Yeah, so to start with, we added on the cued articulation onto the flashcards. So that really helps with those children who've got sort of speech sound production difficulties. So having the cued articulation really helped those. And that's something that was recommended by the speech therapist. So that was really useful for us. We also have more added visual support when we do the apply section. So when they're making the word, we added in sort of a phoneme frame, which just added that sort of real visual frame that really helps to focus their attention on that word, where to put each sound. So we use magnetic letters for some of them. So this is a really early stage at the moment that we're doing with some of our phase 2. All they have to do is match the magnetic letters to the right sound to start with. And then as they progress through, we can remove the text. And so then they have to insert those magnetic letters themselves. And then as they progress even more, we can reduce the magnetic letters and they can start to handwrite those sounds in.
You've got intervention stuff as well. Yeah, okay.
So just lots of added visual support.
It's 5 o'clock. I'm hoping we've covered everything, because I know some of the questions Tara answered in other things she was talking about, but please do get in touch if there is anything that we haven't answered that you want us to answer. Apologies to the person that asked me to close the slideshow. I was making it through the other comments and didn't see that one until the end. Yeah, get in touch with us. Thank you so much for your time, and this presentation will be shared afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you.